what she calls close and dense networks, then that means that community will maintain that language because they are always mixing with each other, because they are working for relatives of the same community, they are meeting relatives of the same community constantly. So this is known as social, close and dense networks among the community. And Leslie Milroy says that if a community has such close and dense networks, they will definitely keep on using their mother tongue. They will keep on using their ethnic language. Later, Professor Lee Wei from the University of London, actually in 1995, agreed with Milroy's theory by looking at the Chinese community in a particular locality in the UK. And in his study, he also agrees that if one has close and dense networks, then one tends to maintain one's ethnic language. But Lee Wei actually went one level further. He looked at different generations, the young Chinese and the first generation Chinese. And he explained that the first generation Chinese had much closer and more dense networks within members of the same generation. Whereas the young Chinese in London, in hindsight in London, actually tended to make friends with other communities, make friends with members of other communities, and then they tended to not so much use their ethnic language with other people who didn't know their ethnic language, but within their community, with the older members, the first generation, they tended to use their mother tongue. So this idea of networks, close and dense networks, at that time was accepted as a theory which was universally applicable. And I often tell my students that a theory that is universally applicable may not be applicable to any other community. You have to look at the other variables involved with a community before you accept a theory done in other countries on other communities. So by examining the community, perhaps we can come to a better understanding of whether the social network theory and language maintenance can be used universally applicable. So we can gain insights into language change, linguistic change or not. So as I said, I have explained to you about Leslie Milroy's work and Lee Wei's work, and we move on then to other research. More recently, Susan Gell, in a study in Oberwart, looked at Hungarian men and women, and she found that although the Hungarian women had close and dense networks with their parents, they tended to work in factories run by Germans, and they got married to Germans, and then they started speaking the German language in their home domain. So although they had close and dense networks with their parents, within their own marital family, with their children, with their German-speaking husband, they shifted completely to the German language. So in other words, we can see that despite close and dense networks with their parents, within their own family home network, they had shifted to German. But their brothers, their Hungarian brothers, were still living with their parents, and so they had close and dense networks with their parents and with their own Hungarian wives and children, and so the Hungarian language was used. So we can see that this close and dense network, we cannot say that just because an ethnic community has close and dense networks that they will had shifted to German. But their brothers, their Hungarian brothers, were still living with their parents, and so they had close and dense networks with their parents and with their own Hungarian wives and children, and so the Hungarian language was used. So we can see that this close and dense network, we cannot say that just because an ethnic community has close and dense networks that they will maintain their language. We can see that in the case of Susan Gall's study in Oberwart, she found that the women marrying German men were moving over to the German language, whereas their brothers who remained as farmers in the farmlands of their ancestors kept on using the Hungarian language with their parents, with their wives, with their children. So we need to look at the community, to examine the community. We have to see whether, for example, are they a minority community in a country where there are many other multilingual families, multilingual languages. So we really need to examine other variables before we can make a decision that the theory advocated by Leslie Milroy is universally applicable. So I will not go into the studies. They are all on the PowerPoint. The study by Gauchet, the study by Labov, by Jenny Cheshire. They all did studies looking at whether the network theory is applicable within different communities, and they give their findings, which is mentioned.